League of Legends was released in 2009. From the very beginning, the game was accompanied by a steady release of high quality and creative animated shorts. And sure, the first few were quite janky and simplistic even for the time, but the potential was always there, and it quickly became clear that the company behind League, Riot Games, had a talent for bringing the world of League of Legends to life through the medium of animation. In the many years following the game's initial release, Riot would create animations with wildly varying styles and tones. These animations would showcase new characters being introduced to the game, they would be used to promote League's esports scene, and even be used as music videos for in-universe bands consisting of characters from the game. Riot would even put in the effort to create animations and original music when trying to sell certain cosmetic items in the game. As the game of League of Legends evolved, for better or for worse, the running joke was always that Riot Games was an animation and music company first, game company second. The question was then, when would Riot add production company to that list? This YouTube comment is from 2014, when Jinx was first introduced to the game. The sentiment of this comment was one shared by many, including me. The interest in a movie or series set in the League of Legends world of Runeterra only grew as the quality of animation and music increased over the years. But as the time went on, it seemed less and less likely that anything tangible would come of it. But then, at the 10-year anniversary of League of Legends in 2019, Arcane was announced. I was certainly excited, but expectations were tempered. Video game adaptations don't exactly have a great reputation, and the massive undertaking of creating a full-length series is certainly a different beast than creating small 3-minute animated shorts. Then a roadblock in the form of COVID-19 happened, and the series was delayed a further year. And finally, in November of 2021, after quite an extensive advertising campaign, Arcane was released on Netflix. And yeah, it's pretty good. So what is Arcane exactly? Arcane is the passion project of Christian Link and Alex Yee from Riot Games. The series is produced and animated by the French animation studio Fortiche and distributed by Netflix. Arcane tells the origin story of a selection of characters from League of Legends, mainly Vi and Jinx, and is set in the twin cities of Piltover and Zaun. Piltover is the self-proclaimed city of progress. They pride themselves on being a global hub for science and innovation. However, hidden beneath the wealth and glamour lies the ugly cost of progress in the form of the oppressed and corrupt undercity of Zaun. And as a quick aside, I know Zaun is technically not yet an independent city during the events of Arcane, but I will interchangeably refer to it as the Undercity or as Zaun for the sake of convenience. Zaun is a sunken city, running along deep fissures in the ground. The air is heavily polluted and the citizens live in poverty, virtually abandoned and neglected by Piltover. This sets the stage for a classic conflict between the quite literal lower class of Zaun being oppressed and exploited by the upper class of Piltover. When it comes to analyzing and reviewing Arcane in depth, well, it's honestly a daunting task. The series is densely packed with details and subtext and relies heavily on visual storytelling in order to convey information. To truly appreciate the depth of talent on display in Arcane, I will analyze and review each episode one at a time while pointing out cool details and cinematic techniques along the way. When appropriate, I will discuss and analyze the overarching storytelling, genre, themes, and use of animation and music. This is certainly not an easy task, given the sheer amount of detail in every frame and the amount of thought and care put into every aspect of the series. This will certainly not be a completely comprehensive analysis, but I will try my best. Now, fair warning before we begin, I don't have an educational background in films or animation, but I do watch a lot of movies, so I'd like to think I have some idea of what makes a movie or a series good. I am also currently talking to you through a YouTube video, so that automatically boosts my credibility by a substantial amount. As we all know, people who ramble about stuff on the internet are widely known to be among the most trustworthy people you can find. This video mostly serves as an outlet for me to rave about how fantastic Arcane is and why I think it works as well as it does. And also this video doubles as some form of therapy, allowing me to process what this show has put me through. And also while I'm busy making disclaimers, if the text at the start of this video wasn't warning enough, I will just say again that this review will contain full spoilers for the whole series all the way through, even from the first episode. So if you're not finished with the show yet, you know what to do first. And also I will try to keep this review contained to Arcane as a standalone TV show, separated from the game of League of Legends. I don't want to alienate people who don't know League or its lore. However, since I love the world of Runeterra and all the characters inhabiting it, I might not be able to resist making a few references to the broader League world whenever I feel it's relevant and interesting. And so, with all of that finally out the way, let us deep dive into Arcane Episode 1, Welcome to the Playground. Arcane begins with a prologue, set some 5+ years before the events of the first act. 7, arguably 8 of the 9 episodes start out with some kind of flashback or backstory. Each flashback relates to one or two characters and shows an incident or question that defines or at least heavily shapes those characters. In episode 1, it's the story of how Violet and Powder lost their parents at the hands of enforcers. The Undercity has risen up against Piltover in an attempt to fight for an independent Zorn and a better future for all Zornites. Powder is singing a song that illustrates the plight of the Zornites. She sings of the poverty they live in, being forced to beg Piltover for scraps in order to survive. The song illustrates the dream of an independent Zorn. Powder sings that the Zornites are not envious of Piltover. They're not asking for Piltover to share their wealth equally, since they know this is not realistic. They don't seek revenge, to wage war, or to rival Piltover in terms of power. Instead, they simply ask the topsiders to leave them alone, to stop oppressing, polluting, and using them for their own gain. As with basically anything in Arcane, this quickly ends in tragedy. We see the aftermath of the fighting as Vi leads Powder past bodies lying on the burning bridge of progress. This scene shifts perspective between Vi and Powder a few times, as we see how they each react to the carnage in different ways. We see these momentary flashes of 2D drawn lines and scribbles. These are used throughout the series to indicate emotional trauma and distress. This is made to look like someone physically drew on the roll of film itself in order to edit out or censor parts of the image. The lines drawn across the faces of the fallen Zornites represent Powder and Vi's minds trying to block out the horror of what is happening in order to protect their mental state. This is later heavily associated with the trauma that Powder and eventually Jinx carries. Vi has also clearly instructed Powder to sing her song and shield her eyes in order to protect her from what is happening around them. This establishes Vi's defining character trait of being a guardian and a protector for those around her. Vi looks over to see Vander beating up an enforcer with his makeshift gauntlets. She seems intimidated by the violence and shields Powder when Vander approaches them. It's clear, however, that they know each other from before the fighting. She asks him non-verbally where their parents are. Vander looks dejected and we see Vi and Powder's mother and presumably father lying dead on the ground, killed in the fighting. Vi breaks down crying, but it's clear that Powder is still too young to truly understand the gravity of the situation. God, this scene is rough to watch. Even now, while editing, it still gets to me. As Vander looks at his gauntlets covered in blood, he realizes that this was all for nothing. Their attempted revolution and all the violence has not brought freedom, only further tragedy. At this point, Vander virtually abandons all hope for a better future and throws down his gauntlets. Going forward, his role will instead be to keep the peace and maintain the status quo. After taking in Vi and Powder, his fighting days are over. He picks up the sisters and leads them back to Zorn. Vi looks up to see the enforcers return to Piltover after having brutally murdered multiple civilians in the riots, her parents included. The camera pans up, showing the gorgeous and spotless city of progress, framed against the clear sky, almost as an otherworldly, unreachable place. In sharp contrast, the smoke rising from the bridge represents the polluted and downtrodden Undercity, nicely setting the stage for the conflict that will define the rest of the show. The prologue is both beautiful and heartbreaking. Without a word of dialogue, the show has established 3 of our main characters, as well as the main source of conflict in the form of Zorn vs Piltover. The beautiful score deserves mention too. The piece that plays during the prologue is called The Bridge, one of several musical tracks performed for Arcane by the talented violinist Chen. Speaking of music, the intro song is called Enemy and is performed by Imagine Dragons and sort of featuring JID, though he's nowhere to be found in the parts of the song included in the show, unfortunately. Now, I'm not gonna dive into the whole Are Imagine Dragons a good or bad band, or does their inclusion in episode 5 work or not thing. We'll probably get to that in a later video, but I think we can all agree that this song is very catchy and it fits the show well. As someone who was first introduced to Imagine Dragons through League of Legends all the way back in 2014, I just think it's cool how far the collaboration between Riot and Imagine Dragons has come. As far as I know, the band members are all huge fans of League, so I think it's only appropriate that they were the ones to make the intro song. Speaking of the intro, there's actually quite a bit to unpack. The first shot is of Vi and Powder and nicely sets up their relationship. Vi is framed in a warm light and is the only person we see at first. Powder is then revealed as being a literal part of Vi, living in her shadow, and the colors turn more blue and cold. Powder is entirely dependent on Vi, she has not yet broken free from her sister's protective sphere. The warm colors of Vi show her kindness and protection of her sister, while the cold colors of Powder foreshadow her tragic story and their eventual falling out. Subtle scribblings and film grain appear when Powder is in focus. For a short second, the X that later comes to represent Jinx flashes on screen. Next we see Jace looking at a hex crystal. He's primarily framed in bright sunlight mixed with the blue from the crystal. This represents his role in Piltover as the symbol for a brighter tomorrow. Then we see Victor. For a few short seconds he's shown as almost being sculpted in real time, as excess material covering him gradually fades away. Not all of it disappears though. His legs are still encased in the material weighing him down. I think this represents him breaking away from the Undercity where he grew up, but still being weighed down by the limitations of his body. His bad leg and his sickness keep him from realizing his full potential. He's also framed in green colors, showing his background as a citizen of the Undercity. We are then introduced to Caitlyn, Heimerdinger and Mel. They are all shown in natural light because they live in the clean, pure air of Piltover. We then see Vander trying to shield the small and fragile sisters from the dangers looming in the Undercity and beyond. The colors are again green to represent Zorn. The camera pans out to show Silco looming menacingly behind them as the villain put in the strings. Blue and purple smoke representing Shimmer blows past Vander and the siblings, removing them from the shot. The next few shots all foreshadow events from Act 2 and onwards after the time skip, as the characters slowly turn into the champions they become in League of Legends. We see the leader of the Firelights, later revealed to be Echo, framed in the same green colors of Zorn. Caitlyn is framed in a yellowish green, showing how she gets mixed up with Zorn from episode 5 and onwards. She fires her rifle as she also does in this episode. Victor is shown with purple colors, representing the corrupting energy of the Hex Core from episode 5 and onwards. The braces he wears on his legs break apart and he's posed as if he's running, as he does in episode 8. We then see Jace with his Mercury Cannon that he acquires and uses also in episode 8. As Jinx's X flashes on screen again, we see her using her Gatling gun Pow Pow as she does from episode 4 and onwards. And finally we see Vi with her Atlas gauntlets that she acquires in episode 8. I think the intro sequence is great. It sets up all our characters, appeases the League of Legends fans by letting some of the characters do their moves from the game, and it does a nice job of foreshadowing a lot of what happens in the show. I also love the remixed version of Enemy. I think it's definitely superior to the original. Right, so now I've spent 14 minutes covering the prologue and the intro. Oh, why did I think this was a good idea? But progress stops for no one, and neither does this analysis. After the prologue, the story jumps forward a number of years. The exact amount of time is unspecified, but I would guess somewhere around 5 years. In this first act, Vi is confirmed to be between 14 and 16 years old, and Powder is confirmed to be 11 or 12 years old. Vi has taken her gang of misfits on a heist. Their mission is to steal valuable items from a rich Piltover penthouse, which turns out to be where Jace lives. This show is just stunningly beautiful. The animation is so next level, it's almost unbelievable. I know I'm not gushing about it nearly enough. Unfortunately, if I paused and marveled at every gorgeous scene, we would most likely be here for the rest of our lives. This scene nicely shows off some of the different animation techniques at play in Arcane. The foreground with Vi, Powder and Clagger is a 3D constructed scene and the characters are all 3D models, but it's all heavily touched up with 2D hand-drawn elements. I'm guessing the steam and wind trail coming off the airship is 2D hand animated as well. And finally, the background is a matte painting, similar to those found in old science fiction movies. This is simply a more or less static image that is placed as the background with everything else layered in front of it. You can barely make out where I'm guessing the 3D scene ends and the matte painting begins. The actual 3D scene might be smaller than this, but based on how the camera pans across the scene, this is my best guess for where the matte painting would start. But that alone would be too easy for Fortige. If you look closely, you can just about make out tiny people down the streets, moving about as a separate animated layer. This attention to detail is everywhere in Arcane. It's what truly elevates the animation beyond almost anything else around.
One day, I'm gonna ride in one of those things.
Not so subtle foreshadowing.
Hi.
These cupcakes are a cute little reference to Caitlyn. In League of Legends, Caitlyn lays down traps with cupcakes in them. In the game, Vi also calls Caitlyn Cupcake, just like in the show.
Vander's gonna kill us.
Yeah, only if we screw up. So don't screw up.
The voice acting is top-notch throughout Arcane. The casting is basically perfect for every role in my opinion. Haley Steinfeld fits the brash but still soft nature of Vi like a glove. It's cool that Arcane has an Oscar-nominated actress on the cast. It also feels slightly fortunate that they managed to hire her when they did. These days Haley is everywhere and I can't imagine she has much time nor is very cheap to hire for voice work. Mia Sinclair Jenness is fantastic as Powder, and I think she was only 11 or 12 at the time of recording. She doesn't have too many lines in the first few episodes, but by episode 3 she delivers some of the best voice acting I've ever heard, honestly. J.B. Blanc is also great as Vander. He embodies the gentle but still dangerous dad character perfectly. He also voices Braum from League of Legends, which is cool, I guess. And finally, Jason Spisak is just perfect as Silco. To me, he steals almost every scene he's in. He truly embodies Silco and perfectly balances his cool and collected nature with his menacing and ruthless side. I will of course dive much deeper into each voice actor and actress as we get further along and as more characters are introduced to the series.
Guys?
I'm guessing this is the crystal that Jason Victor later used to experiment on Hextech, as all the other crystals we see are stolen by Powder. Jace can apparently play some sort of guitar. I don't know enough about instruments to tell which type it is, but maybe someone can enlighten me. This looks like a blueprint for some kind of hammer. Maybe it's an early prototype for the Mercury hammer that Jace acquires in episode 8, or maybe it's just to show that his family deals with hammers. It's hard to tell. This sandwich is the true villain of this story. Powder would have never discovered the Hextech crystals if not for this suspiciously placed sandwich. One wonders if perhaps this tasty treat is some kind of trap placed to lure in poor defenseless hungry orphans from the Undercity. But then again, maybe not. But seriously, those sandwiches look way too inviting. What kind of crazy person leaves sandwiches lying around like that? Right, so Powder discovers the Hextech crystals. While she normally has grey eyes, when she looks at the crystals they turn blue. Throughout the show, a huge emphasis is placed on eyes, and especially eye color. The color often reflects a need or want that a character has. The eyes are literally lit up by a specific emotion. The facial animations in Arcane are honestly superb. I'm not sure I've ever seen them done better in any animated medium. Arcane uses none of the traditional techniques for achieving realistic facial animations. The animation makes no use of motion capture, where the performance of actors are captured digitally using 3D recording software. Nor does Arcane use rotoscoping, where reference footage of actors are traced over like in old Disney movies. As far as I'm aware, all the facial and body animations are exclusively done using keyframe animation. Since the models are 3D, a program can be used to adjust the joints in the model in order to position the eyes, the eyelids, the lips, the body parts and so on to get the expression and movement just right in each frame. However, on top of this, hand-drawn details and adjustments are added, such as the glints in the eyes of the characters or blood, sweat and tears on the faces. I will definitely highlight some cool examples when we get to them. To absolutely no one's surprise, the heist goes catastrophically wrong. Powder drops a hex crystal which blows up Jace's apartment. This turns out to be the inciting incident that sets all the events of the season in motion. This whole first act is really clever in basically setting up a prolonged bait and switch. The first act, and especially the first episode, feels like a kid's adventure story, similar to something like The Goonies or Stranger Things. Both in genre and in tone, the first act is very different from the rest. Everything is more lighthearted with more jokes and quips. We get to see the kids struggling to make their way in a world that is hostile and dangerous to them. There is a seemingly one-dimensional evil villain for them to defeat in Silco, and we naturally root for them, and from my experience with similar shows or movies, we obviously know that the kids are gonna be fine. Right? Even the title of the first episode, Welcome to the Playground, suggests a lighter tone and suggests that the kids are never truly in danger. All of this is completely turned on its head in episode 3 of course, for an incredibly effective gut punch. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, in episode 1, we are still faced with what we believe is a kids' adventure show where everything and everyone is gonna be fine. This is such a great shot. Powder clearly doesn't fit into the dynamics of the gang. She's too young and still too innocent to stomach all the physical violence around her. Perhaps the trauma of losing her parents still haunts her. The violence in Arcane is in general surprisingly realistic and for the most part does not feel glorified. Some of the fight scenes in Act 3 do go into unrealistic territory, but for the most part the violence feels honest and is generally shown not to be the optimal solution. The show makes it clear though that in the rough world of Zorn, a choice between violence and no violence is often a choice between life or death, and therefore not really a choice at all. In this scene, Powder's use of what is clearly a very gruesome and potentially deadly homemade bomb is a little worrying. She is obviously too young to fully understand the consequences of throwing bombs at people, which, needless to say, becomes very evident in episode 3. Beyond that, the environment that she's growing up in and the trauma from losing her parents at a young age has probably left her quite emotionally underdeveloped.
You did what?
I'm sorry.
Milo is a bit of a bully toward Powder. I like how he raises his hand after saying,
Who saw that coming?
and is left hanging completely. He definitely has a very negative impact on Powder's mental state, as we see very clearly in later episodes when the memory of him haunts and taunts her. He's also the first person to coin the name Jinx for her.
She jinxes every job.
It's alright, Powder.
Vi is ever caring though, which is heartwarming. Before we make our way down to the Undercity, I want to take a moment to talk about the character design of Arcane. The amount of thought and care put into every little detail of each character design is incredible. The design of each character tells a multitude of stories with visuals alone. All the kids have ill-fitting, makeshift and asymmetrical outfits to show that they are barely getting by. In Piltover, symmetry is used throughout the show to indicate not only high status and wealth, but also to show that the city is safe and in balance. The opposite is of course the case for the Undercity, where everything is asymmetrical and off-kilter. Vi has a shirt that is cut off center, and she has more buttons on one side than the other. Her pants are similarly asymmetrical, and she's wearing bandages on her right arm and fingerless gloves on the other. She also has some kind of trinket pinned to her right shoulder, which seems to be a trophy from an earlier job the group did together, or maybe something Powder made her as a gift. Vi is also considerably more bulky than the rest of the kids, except perhaps for Clagger, which makes sense given her fighting prowess. She generally carries herself in a very, let's just say, unladylike manner, probably owing to the fact that she's grown up around Vander, Milo and Clagger and has had to get tough fast in order to survive. Powder probably has the most dilapidated outfit of the whole bunch. Her shirt is completely off-center, too short on one side, and the sleeves she's wearing on her arms are different lengths. Her hair is clearly cut by a not very professional barber, most likely Vi or Vander, and she has small pieces of metal in her hair in place of ribbons. She's very timid in her mannerisms. She keeps to the background and makes herself small in order to avoid danger. Milo has a patch on his pants and two shoes that are clearly different sizes. He also wears bandages on just one of his arms and has a gem or something pinned to his right shoulder, similar to what Vi has. And finally, Clagger also has an off-center and way too small shirt. He has belts wrapped around his chest with what appears to be yet more trinkets and trophies from earlier heists. The character designs are great, while the characters themselves, at least for now, are nothing revolutionary. You've got the scrawny kid who talks too much, the overweight kid who is more quiet, the small timid kid, and the strong leader. They border on being stock characters, but that's not a bad thing, as it allows the first episode to focus more on setting things up. Vi and Powder of course get fleshed out a lot more later on, while Milo and Clagger, well, you know how that goes. As the Undercity is revealed for the first time, notice the change of color palette. We go from the natural blue of the sky and orange of the setting sun to a noxious sickly green mixed with dull grey and brown. Also, did I mention the animation is insane? We also get our first real needle drop of the series.
Who told you it was down here? Come along if you wanted.
The name of the song that plays is the same as the episode Welcome to the Playground, and it's performed by B. Miller. This song tells the story of the kind of place that Zorn is. It's a dangerous, seedy place, but it's also an exciting playground where virtually no rules exist and you can live out your fantasies. The way Arcane utilizes music throughout is fascinating to me. I've seen people call the music unfitting or distracting, which I very much disagree with. I completely adore every song in the soundtrack, and I love the way they are utilized in the show. Arcane clearly places a huge emphasis on its music. Each episode has one or more original contemporary tracks, and whenever they play, they take center stage. The titles of 4 of the episodes are either the title of a track from that episode or part of the lyrics from that song. Each track is supported by what is basically an animated music video. No dialogue is ever spoken when these tracks come on, and the lyrics and tone of each song heavily support the scene in which they are used and the narrative as a whole. The framing often changes as well, switching from showing the point of view of a specific character to becoming more like a passive observer. Often the tracks may start out or end up diegetic by being part of the world itself. They may be played through a jukebox or by the musicians themselves in the form of cameos. I will of course delve deeper into each track separately as we get to them. As the kids make their way through the Undercity, it's clear that they look at home but not entirely at ease. They know these streets are dangerous and that they need to stay alert at all times. These 2 tall characters are most likely from a region of Runeterra, the League of Legends world, inspired by Asian culture called Ionia. We might see this region in future seasons if the League of Legends lore is anything to go by. This lady is a Yordle, the same race as Heimerdinger. She's the one who takes over the establishment as the Madame between Act 1 and 2 and is apparently named Babette. The man being thrown out of the brothel is seemingly a cameo by Delors Arnaud, the co-founder and creative director of Fortiche. The Last Drop is such a great name for a bar. As we enter the bar, we shift perspective to Huck, making a deal with some shady people. The framing brings us into his point of view as we follow him from the bar to his table. The music also seamlessly becomes part of the ambient sounds of the bar, which helps to bring us into the point of view of Huck as opposed to being unbiased observers. The framing in this scene highlights the conflict between Huck and these 2 shady characters. Huck is a small, nervous man, and the way the camera is placed accentuates this. Whenever we look from his point of view, the camera is down low, showing the power that the 2 traders hold over him. From the opposite perspective, the camera looks down on Huck, showing him to be small and helpless. As soon as Vander joins the scene, the tables turn, and now Huck and Vander look down on the traders as Vander holds all the power in the Last Drop. It's a simple but effective use of perspective. Another thing this scene highlights is Arcane's use of a mostly realistic camera. Within the medium of animation, Fortiche has the freedom to move and place the camera anywhere and use it in a way that would not be possible in the real world. But the way the camera is used is generally quite similar to how it might be used if the story was live action. Realistic dollies, pans, zooms, handheld and wide shots make up the majority of shots in the series. Furthermore, real-world specific things such as focus and lens flare is used sporadically to make the camera seem even more like a real entity. This way of using the camera is an interesting choice. I think it was done because it works well with the very lifelike character animation and the mostly grounded and realistic story and setting. That is not to say that the camera work is boring or uninspired. There is plenty of creative framing and camera work in Arcane, as we will see. The kids live in the basement of the Last Drop. Vi has what appears to be a saxophone and boxing gloves by her bed. She uses the boxing gloves in episode 2 when she trains at the boxing machine thing in the arcade. Judging by her fighting style, Vi has clearly received actual training in how to properly fight, as is also demonstrated by her fights against Civica in later episodes. Vander has most likely trained her ever since taking her in. The instrument is curious though. She doesn't really strike me as the type to play an instrument, so it might not be hers, but I could be wrong. Hold on, an idea is taking shape. A multi-million-dollar idea. Riot, Fortiche, take notes. A band of musical misfits. Chen on the violin, of course. Vi on the saxophone. Yes, it's a strange mix of instruments, but it's different, it's bold, it's what the people of Piltover and Zorn want, and we all know it. Powder doing the vocals, as we've already established, she has the chops for that. Jace with his guitar thingy, whatever that is. And finally, the cherry on top. Heimerdinger, dinging it up on the drums. It's the perfect plan. Thank me later, right? God, what am I doing with my life? Anyway, back to the thing. On the wall by Vi's bed, there is also a barely discernible pin-up poster of some lady, which may hint at Vi playing for the other team, as we of course learn more of in later episodes. Everyone's favorite dad character has an interesting design that serves as a contrast to the kids. He generally has well-fitting clothes, and his outfit is almost entirely symmetrical. The only exceptions are the brace on his arm covering the scar where Silco slashed him, and a knee pad on his left leg. The symmetrical nature of his character might reference the fact that he is involved with Piltover through the deal he has with the Enforcers.
They've got plenty while we're down here scraping together coins. When did you get so comfortable living in someone else's shadow?
This jab obviously hits deeper than Vi realizes. Vander's whole thing is that he begrudgingly accepts the necessary evil of living in Piltover's shadow, because the alternative is even worse. Vander clearly treats Vi differently from the other kids. He sort of sees her as an equal and puts the responsibility of being the leader of the gang on her.
You say run, they run. You say swim, they dive in. You say light a fire, they show up with oil. But whatever happens, it's on you.
He holds her to a higher standard than the other kids because he knows she has the necessary grit to do what needs to be done. Trusting anyone of her age with that much responsibility is not fair, but life in the Undercity demands that Vi has to grow up fast and learn to protect her family if they are to have any chance of surviving. Arguably, he puts too much pressure on her. He instills the idea that she is essentially responsible for everything that happens, when in reality a lot of the events of these first episodes are mostly out of her control. He tries to toughen her, but this honestly only worsens all the trauma and survivor's guilt she struggles with in later episodes. Vi's whole thing is punching at any and all things that threaten her or the people she cares about. In the Undercity, this is unfortunately often the only option, but that doesn't make it a good option, as Vander tries to teach her. This scene almost falls into the classic misunderstanding trope where one character listens in on a conversation and misunderstands what is being said because they leave at the worst possible time. For the most part, Arcane does a good job of subverting tropes to keep the audience guessing. In this scene, we expect this conversation to create a rift between Vi and Powder, but contrary to what the trope usually implies, the conflict is quickly resolved in their next scene together. But the scene still serves its purpose of showing that Powder is insecure and hinges a lot of her mental stability on Vi being supportive of her. Also, I absolutely love this scene.
You see this look on my face? This will always mean it's time to shut up.
But
The amount of expression that Fortiche is able to bring out of the characters is simply stunning.
Echo, what's going on with that thing?
Give me a few seconds.
These are the first words that Echo speaks in the show. They foreshadow a lot about his character, especially if you know a bit about him from League of Legends. Now, I won't spoil it for people who have only watched Arcane, since I'm almost certain they will delve into this more in Season 2. However, I think what Echo says here also works in the context of the bridge scene in Episode 7, which we will certainly get to. Suffice it to say, Echo is all about needing just a few seconds in order to make a huge difference, which I'm sure will be elaborated on in the next season. Also, I love the way Echo runs. It's so full of childlike carefreeness. It's adorable.
There's worse things than enforcers out there.
In this scene, Vander speaks of Silco, remembering their confrontation after the failed rebellion shown in the prologue. Vander is touching the brace covering the wound that Silco gave him. This would be absolutely impossible to know the first time watching the episode. The show not only expects you to pay attention to things in the current episode, but also to remember things that were shown or hinted at in previous episodes. This is part of the reason why the show feels like it gets better and better with every episode. As the show goes on, the setups from previous episodes result in satisfying and, for the most part, well-earned payoffs. This also makes previous episodes feel even better after the fact, as you start to realize all the work they did in setting things up and how almost all story threads get nicely tied together. This makes Arcane a true joy to rewatch. Almost every scene is riddled with details and setups that can be appreciated even more on subsequent rewatches. This circle thing behind Echo is some kind of vehicle, which Powder and Echo ride in the music video for Enemy. I'm guessing Echo built this, maybe with the help of Powder. The Enforcers are always seen wearing masks when they venture down into the Undercity. The air is toxic, which further cements how the people living there basically have no future. As shown later in the series, Victor has become deathly ill from growing up breathing the air in the fissures. Part of why the Enforcers are wearing the masks are probably also due to them feeling superior to the people of the Undercity. They view them as lesser people and don't want to breathe the same air as them. The mask Echo looks through kind of resembles the owl mask he later wears as the leader of the Firelights.
You know this crossed the line upstairs.
I love Shoda Agdashlu's voice. I totally didn't have to look up how that name is pronounced, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar. Her voice through the character of Grayson carries such an intimidating presence and commands respect. It's kind of sad that she has such a small role in the show, but what can you do? Vi is such a great sister and guardian. She constantly tries to comfort Powder and instill confidence in her. This scene is so heartbreaking in retrospect. Powder says that she's not a fighter, but in time she will become a ruthless one. Vi ensures her that her bombs will work, which they of course end up doing to the worst possible outcome. All these early scenes between the sisters are just so rough to watch, knowing what happens. Powder is just too precious and I just want to hug her and keep her safe. The bond Vi and Powder shares is so nicely set up in such a short span of time. It's clear the immense love that they have for each other, being the only biological family they have left. Their relationship was critical to get right, not only for episode 3 to be extra painful, but also because it's the emotional core that most of the story hinges on. As a random aside, I really like the fact that the colors Violet and Powder, as in Powder Blue, mixed together to create the purple color of their mother's hair. That's a cute little detail. Vi is afraid that Vander will force her to give the crystals back to Piltover, but she doesn't want their heist to have been for nothing. This will of course have huge consequences down the line.
And one day, this city's gonna respect us.
Yeah, this show needs to win every single award related to animation that exists. As I mentioned earlier, this first act really sets Silco up to be the generic evil villain who likes to be evil just because. It's only later that we learn his motivations and get a deeper look at his character. For now, the show is setting him up as the stereotypical bad guy that our gang of ragtag kids have to defeat in order to save the day. I have a small complaint with the fact that Silco is disfigured. It's a common cliche and it always feels like a slightly cheap way to make someone look scary or intimidating. It's not a huge issue, and since his damaged eye actually serves a purpose in the story, I don't mind it too much. It just feels like a slightly lazy way to make the bad guy look more like the bad guy. As with everything else, the sound design in Arcane is phenomenal. If at all possible, I would recommend watching Arcane with a decent set of speakers or headphones. The sound design truly shines. And as we say goodbye and rest in pieces to that poor cat, we reach the end of the first episode of Arcane. Before we conclude and round off this episode, I'll just quickly include a few neat details that didn't really fit in anywhere else in the video. In 2019, Riot released a music video for their in-universe hip-hop/pop band called True Damage for the band Single Giants. In this video, the poster for Arcane is included in the background, even though no one at the time knew what it actually was. The poster itself also has a cool detail. In Powder's hair, the name Jinx is hidden in plain sight. Fortiche and Riot really went all out on the details, and I love it. This first episode is basically all set up. A lot of characters and plot points need to be introduced while easing audiences into the League of Legends world of Runeterra. The world building is excellent. Anyone, regardless of their prior knowledge of the world of League, would have a decent idea of what this small slice of the League universe is like. The episode establishes Piltover as the rich, modern city juxtaposed with the poor, oppressed Undercity. It establishes the main characters from Zorn and their struggles and conflict with Piltover. And most importantly, this episode establishes the emotional core of the story in the relationship between Vi and Powder. The inciting incident, the apartment explosion, sets everything in motion like falling dominoes. The episode ends with a tease for the possibility of an internal conflict in Zorn caused by Silco and the Shimmer. The episode doesn't overindulge. For a casual viewer, the broader world of League may as well not exist. No regions or characters apart from Piltover and Zorn and those that live there are mentioned yet, so as to not overburden audiences with information. The story throughout the show is very efficient and streamlined. Every piece of dialogue or scene is deliberate and directly serves the plot in some way. In early episodes, as things get set up, this works really well. After watching this episode, if you know nothing about League of Legends lore, you might think Arcane is a kids' adventure show, or at the very least that it's a lot more lighthearted than it turns out to be. This is all a very effective setup for the trauma, despair and eventual therapy sessions we all know are coming. It almost goes without saying at this point, but the animation is of course incredible. The term every frame a painting has been thrown around a lot, but it really does feel apt. I think most people rank episode 1 and probably episode 2 as some of their least favorite ones compared to how fantastic all the later episodes are. These first episodes may feel less interesting, but that's because they have to do all the legwork of setting everything up. Watching the later episodes where all this setup is paid off in amazing fashion honestly makes me appreciate the early episodes so much for how well they lay the foundation for the story, characters and the world. The incredible quality of every aspect of Arcane came as a bit of a shock to me. Sure, the writing was on the wall, with Riot delivering top tier animations for many years, some of them even made by Fortiche. But animated shorts are one thing, a 6-hour long series is quite another. As a long-time fan of the League world, I think it's safe to say that Arcane, being as good as it is a dream come true for me. The world and characters that I've known for so long being brought to life in such a way is simply a joy to watch. And I guess that about wraps it up for this video. I admire your endurance and your dedication in making it all the way through this way too long video about me rambling about Arcane. This is my first attempt at doing any analysis or review, especially something of this size and scope, so I welcome any feedback and criticism that you may have. And I guess that's it. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video whenever I get around to making that, probably in a month or 2 or 3 or never. Only 8 more videos to go after this one. Yay! If we're lucky, I'll get through all the episodes of Season 1 right in time for Season 2 to come out sometime in, I don't know, 2023 or whatever. In the meantime, take care.